Mafia 1 is a great success story of a smaller developer aiming to create an authentic, story-focused experience inspired by Italian mobster movies. There was a large focus on its characters and story. The gameplay had many elements of realism to maintain a level of authenticity to the action. Traffic laws need to be observed, along with the combat that was very deadly. The story of Tommy was an interesting one, seeing him get swept up into the mob life and then making efforts to keep his family safe and escape that life. But these developers were not finished with this genre after just one game. After their success with the first Mafia, they began working on crafting the second entry. Mafia 2 was going to be a completely different story with a new set of characters. They would work to make advancements in how they told their story, along with improving many aspects about the gameplay. But Mafia 2's development was not a smooth one, resulting in a wealth of cut content not presented within the release game. The sequel that was released featured a compelling story about the glamorization of the mob while taking every opportunity to show the dark sides of it. I present to you a look back at Mafia 2. Illusion Softworks began working on the game's script in 2003. The sequel would focus on a story that began in the 1940s and would follow the main character to the 50s. This story would see Vito rise through organized crime with his best friend Joe. Two themes within the story would be centered around friendship and betrayal. The developers aimed to have the story be an important part of the experience, just like in the first game, but with this being a sequel, they wanted to provide a more cinematic experience. The story would focus on both the glamorization of the mob life, along with the darker parts of it. With friendship being one of the strong themes within this narrative, Vito and Joe's relationship would be at the center of the game. The characters would be different from each other, but unified through that friendship. The main piece of gameplay was going to focus on the shooting. The first game presented combat as lethal situations, and the developers wanted to retain that in the sequel. The player would only be able to take a few hits before they died. To allow the player to adapt to these gunfights, a cover system was implemented. The cover would give the player some protection, but that didn't mean that the player was completely safe. In some instances, cover could be destroyed, or enemies would try and rush your position. Fistfights were also used as another means of combat. The system was going to be completely different compared to the first title. These fights would be one-on-one encounters with a two-button system. To add some extra flair and brutality to the fistfights, context-sensitive finishing moves could be executed on hurt enemies. Driving was the other piece of gameplay, and it was important for the team to capture the look and feel of the cars from the 40s and 50s. Along with this, the open world would need to maintain this same level of authenticity. The NPCs would react to the player's inputs, and they would abide by traffic laws and generally go about their lives. This aimed to give off the feeling that this was a living and breathing world that the player was interacting with. The developers made efforts to the smaller details within the game. They wanted the areas to feel more like they were lived in and actual places. For example, when you are in Vito's apartment, you will see bits of food and trash around the apartment to make it feel lived in. Like with the first game, the developers aimed to put the players in a mob movie experience. It was important that when writing the game that the gameplay and story worked together to create a unified experience that created gameplay that was plausible for the story. Since the core gameplay would focus on shooting, it was important to have an increase in escalation throughout the narrative so it would appropriately create these explosions of violence for the player to experience. The developers wanted to create this mob fantasy that provided an engaging story while also providing these memorable gameplay sequences with everything feeling like it belonged and worked together. This new sequel was intended to be built for the PS2 and the original Xbox. To improve the development speed, the team was going to use a licensed game engine, but their efforts did not work out how they intended since the engine they were going to license was no longer available and that engine developer was going out of business. This shifted the development back towards creating their own engine for Mafia 2. This was just the beginning of the issues that the team would face on their road to creating the sequel. As development progressed, the team made the decision to shift their focus to the next generation of consoles, and this meant that they were walking into unknown territory. Members of the team have stated that issues were created in development from the story being written in isolation from the team members that were working on the gameplay mechanics. One developer stated that this created friction during the making of Mafia 2 since this narratively focused experience was potentially at odds with the sandbox elements of the gameplay. As a result, gameplay was not the first item on the list for the game. Story and visuals were presented as more important than the actual gameplay. This was particularly seen in that the gameplay developers were not able to playtest the game until late into their developmental cycle, and one developer describes this experience as needing to imagine how the playtesting would actually work without actually doing it. During development, Illusion Softworks was also purchased by Take-Two Interactive, and organized under their new name, 2K Czech. While not every detail about the development of Mafia 2 is known, we can piece together that from some developer interviews and a wealth of cut content provided online, that Mafia 2 had a troubled development. There seemed to be a lot of friction between the developers, along with potential friction with the publisher. We will discuss the cut content later on in this video. On August 23, 2010, Mafia 2 was released to the world. Our narrative starts out with Vito retelling his story of how he came to America with his family from Italy. Years later, he becomes friends with Joe, and the two of them get caught robbing a store. Vito is the one who gets caught, and he has two options: serve his time in jail or get shipped off to Italy to fight for America. Vito serves his time in the service and gets to return back to America for a month before he is sent back. Joe talks to his contacts and is able to forge paperwork to get Vito to not have to return to the war. Vito works with Joe to gain some wealth. They do a few jobs for Henry, and he works for Clemente. One job involves stealing some gas stamp rations. Later on, this is the job that causes Vito to get caught by the law enforcement and results in him going to prison. While in prison, Vito meets up with another mob boss. His name is Leo Galante. Leo takes Vito under his wing and informs Vito that Clemente was just using Vito and Joe. Vito gains Leo's respect by winning in several prison fights on Leo's behalf. Once Vito gets out of prison, Joe introduces him to Eddie, and the two of them start doing jobs for Eddie. Eddie works for the Falcone family. After earning their way, both Vito and Joe become part of the Falcone family. Vito and Joe conduct an assassination on Clemente. Since Henry worked for Clemente, he no longer has an employer, and since Henry is friends with Vito and Joe, they ask Eddie if he can do some work for the Falcone family. At this point in the story, tensions are on the rise between the different mob families in the city. The Falcones want to protect themselves, which results in them ordering Henry to kill Leo. Vito rushes over to Leo's home to warn him about the assassination, and is able to get him out of the city before anyone can get to him. Henry comes to Joe and Vito about a potential side job to earn some extra money. It's high risk and high reward. Their plan is to take a loan from a loan shark in the city and then sell dope on the side. They all make a lot of money from this, but one morning Joe and Vito meet up with Henry and he is killed by several Chinese gangsters. It is revealed that they killed Henry because he was an informant. This creates a lot of tension between the Italian families and the Chinese gangsters. Leo comes back to the city and offers Vito a deal. Kill Falcone and they are even. Vito and Joe work together to take down Falcone and his men. At the end, Vito enters the car with Leo and Joe goes into another car. Joe's car goes down another path and Vito is worried for Joe, but Leo says that Joe was never part of the deal. Where Mafia 1's intro felt like it was easing us into the city and the story, I felt like Mafia 2 had a similar tone but done in a different way. Through the introduction, we see Vito detailing how he came to America, the struggles his family had, the issues he had with his father, and how he met Joe and how they turned to a life of crime. In a short period of time, we get a nice baseline for our character. It is giving off this feeling that we are going to be experiencing Vito's life. Since the story takes place from the 40s to the 50s, it was a good move to incorporate something as big as World War II into Vito's life. I really enjoyed this first mission, and we get to see how Vito wants the same power, success, and respect that the Don had in Italy. I do think that his time in the war was rushed because of how the game executes it. Vito gets shipped off, we complete one mission, and then he's back home. I would have loved to spend more missions with him in Italy. This would have been a great opportunity to explore more of his soldier side, along with showing us how he wants to be more like that Don he saw. I wanted to point out that while playing the game, you can feel like there's cut content missing with this certain section, and we will get into that in just a bit. I think the writer did a really good job with Vito throughout the story. He's an interesting and flawed character. We get to see how, at a young age, Vito is looking for wealth, power, and respect. He is given options to earn this through legal work, but this isn't fast enough for Vito. He wants wealth, but he doesn't want to wait for it. And with that added appeal of his buddy Joe being an influence who gets him into a lot of trouble, Vito also sees this as a more effective way to earn what he wants. The story makes a point to show how Vito did not want to end up like his father. At several points in the story, Vito sees how his fast track to success is really just going to set him back, and he will ultimately be in the same position as his father. Vito's father lived in a crappy apartment, owed money to people, and never became rich. Vito's first attempt at fast-tracking his success results in him getting caught by the cops and being shipped off to Italy to fight in the war. The second time sees Vito going to prison for an illegal stamp operation. The third time is towards the end of the game, where his fancy house is burned down by rival gangsters. He owes money to a powerful loan shark, and the same one that his father owed money to as well. And Vito ends up living in a dead man's apartment. I really enjoyed the parallels between him and his father and how that is weaved into the narrative. Vito is also very likable. He has an approachable personality and has a loyalty to his family and close friends. The loyalty does get a little murky because at the end of the day, Vito is out for himself and his own gain. His family needs to pay off a debt that his dead father had, but it's due very soon. One interesting aspect of this is that Vito tries to get a job at the docks where his dad worked. This is where the player can move boxes from A to B for a little bit of money. The game lets you choose to stop right away or keep going for a while. Where Mafia 1 forced you to play an entire mission as a cab driver to be annoyed by the mundane life before the mob life was thrusted upon Tommy, here we have a similar thing for Vito. By allowing the player to stop this mundane task right away, it allows the player to feel that drive of Vito wanting to find success as quickly as possible, which leads him back into a life of crime. Like I said, Vito is loyal to the people he cares about and to further his own success. But this also gets him into a lot of trouble because he has a tendency to not question what he needs to do. This probably explains why many members of the mob like him so much. He is experienced from his army training and he doesn't ask too many questions, he just follows orders. This lack of a questioning personality is a character flaw that gets him into a lot of trouble, and this is why we see Vito is used throughout the story and is the perfect pawn for the mob. The story has many great elements, and one area that I was surprised by was how the game dedicates an entire chapter to when Vito goes to jail. In most games, this would have been an extended cutscene, but here we get to experience the prison life and how Vito is belittled by the guards, and how he gains an ally with Leo Galante. This relationship that starts in the prison is ultimately what saves Vito's life from his mistakes at the end of the game. Joe is probably the best side character in the entire game. Vito and Joe's relationship is what gets Vito into a lot of trouble, but it's very believable. Joe is always trying to rope Vito in on his ideas and jobs. Both of them will bicker and bust each other's balls throughout the story. Joe provides a lot of the comedy. You buy into this friendship, and honestly, I would be fine with a Joe-centered game or a spin-off. Towards the end of the game, Vito and Joe create a lot of drama for the mob families in the city, which almost results in a gang war. At the end of the game, Leo comes back to offer Vito a deal. Kill the head of the Falcone family and all is essentially forgiven. Vito does this and teams up with Joe to complete the job. At the end of the game, the car that has Joe makes a turn and Vito is concerned. Leo says that Joe wasn't part of the deal. Someone had to be the fall guy after what happened, implying that Joe was killed. I like the message at the end of the game with how Vito has lost everything from the choices he has made and that his efforts to commit crime to get ahead never actually got him there. All of Vito's actions to fast track his success and not end up like his father put him in a similar position to his dad. The quick shift to the ending lets this part really hit home how Vito's actions ended up costing him his best friend. I go back and forth on whether I really like the execution of the ending. The story ends abruptly with an almost cliffhanger-like feel to it. I wonder if this was intentional or if there was more that we never got to see since there were additional endings that were cut from the game. Part of me likes the ending because it effectively hammers home the idea that crime does not pay, but at the same time, I wish it was not so abrupt. Overall, I like the message of the ending, but I have mixed feelings on the execution. Mafia 2 is one of the best examples in the video game medium of excellent writing. The development and character arc of Vito is a compelling one. Like with the first, the story takes familiar elements of gangster flicks and tells a unique story with a lot of style and substance. The direction in the cutscenes is engaging, the dialogue is raw, captivating, and full of funny lines. The relationship between Vito and Joe is believable. I really enjoyed experiencing Vito's efforts to try and shortcut his way to success through crime and how the consequences of his actions led to some compelling drama. Mafia 2 has an excellent story, and it's the strongest area of the game. Lastly, I really like the execution on how Mafia 2 connected back in with Mafia 1. It is done as a nice reveal that happens later in the game, and it puts the player in a difficult spot as Vito and Joe are revealed to be Tommy's killers from the first game. Before we get into the next section, I want to highlight some of the comedy and some of the dark humor found in this wonderful story.
Shit, Mike, you can wash your fucking hands once in a while. Now I need a fucking bath.
Hey, I've been working. Working people occasionally get dirty, you know? Besides, I just wiped them off.
With what? The same fucking rag you used to clean the toilet, you filthy fuck?
Put a lid on it. What are you, from the health department, or you want to do some business?
Business, of course. This here's my friend Vito. Vito, this is Mike Brewski. But don't shake his hand. I ain't got that much soap at home.
Nice to meet you, Vito.
Me and Vito go way back.
Me?
Just come.
Got it.
God damn it, Mike. You put your grubby mitts on my fucking coat. I paid a fortune for this thing.
All right, calm down, or I'll stick them up your ass, you sissy.
You know, dry cleaning costs these
Jesus
days
Christ.
plenty, and who knows if they can even get this filth
You
out.
shut up.
Vito, come on, let's go, andiamo. Meantime, I'll be sending you the cleaning bill for my coat.
Yeah, I'll change my address, you rat prick.
Mafia 2's gameplay focuses on 3 areas: driving, fistfights, and shooting. Let's start out with the driving. I love the driving in this game. There's a large variety of different cars, along with them feeling a bit different from each other. Some of the heavier vehicles feels like you're controlling a tank, and others have great acceleration. Like with the first game, there are some elements of realism added into it. You will need to watch your speed around the cops, otherwise they will try to give you a ticket. While not usually an issue, if you drive the same car all the time, you will eventually need to fill up on gas. I only had to do this once while in the story mode. Thankfully, the sequel does not have the cops chase after you if you run any red lights. I understand that this added another element of realism in the first game, but this was definitely an area where I think they added an annoyance to the player rather than really extending that immersion. With Mafia 2, I feel like the driving finds a happy middle ground by containing some elements of realism while ensuring that it does not hurt the fun of the game. Just like in the first game, you will be doing a lot of driving, and I honestly loved every minute of it more in the sequel. The driving is very enjoyable and never becomes tedious. Mafia 2 provides some nice customization options to the players with their vehicles. You can repaint any of your vehicles, improve the car's performance, and change some of the small aspects about your car. The customization is not vast, but it is appreciated as it provides enough for players to be able to add their own personal expression to these vehicles. One huge missed opportunity is the lack of any racing side missions since the driving is so good. This would have been fun to do races around the city for money or upgrades or even earn secret cars. If you speed or bump into other cars or attack other people in front of the cops, they will come after you. If your crime is minor, they will just try to arrest you, or you can bribe them to look the other way. If the cops mark you as wanted, then you will need to change your clothes so that they cannot easily detect you on the map. The cops can also mark your car to hunt you down, and you can change the plates of your car to be able to remove this or get a new vehicle. The cops can be annoying at times, as they seem to always pop right up when you're trying to break into another vehicle. They are pretty easy to get away from, but they should be treated as a potential threat, as higher level cops can take you out pretty quick. When you are not driving from mission to mission, many of the early encounters will involve fistfights.
This no happen if you use tiger style.
The fist fighting is both underwhelming and better than the original. When you enter into a fist fight, the game turns into an exclusive 1v1 mode. You can block attacks, use a light attack, and a heavy attack. If you block an attack and hit the light attack right away, you can do a counter. The combat does not get any more involved than this. Every fist fight feels like the same fight reused over and over again. What adds some extra flair to these fights are the finishers, but the variety is not there either. Where the first game had fistfights that felt clunky and a mess to control, Mafia 2 improves the controls of the fighting, but they did not make them more engaging. The fistfighting feels serviceable at best and needs more variety to the fights themselves. A missed opportunity was how you cannot use any melee weapons during the fights. In the first game, you could use brass knuckles, bats, and other weapons. The fighting here feels like a nice base to expand upon, but the game never did. There are a few situations where you will need to use stealth. This just boils down to specific points in the game where you'll need to crouch walk and take down some enemies without using your guns. This is pretty bare bones when it comes to stealth, and it's not used often. These short stealth encounters are used to help build tension and build up to those bigger fights. Like in the first game, you can lockpick cars, and what was once a button that you need to just hold down is a simple yet fun minigame to do here. When the action really heats up in the second half, you will be in plenty of shootouts.
Trusted you from the moment I saw you.
The shooting is vastly improved from the original. Mafia 2 plays like a third-person cover shooter. You can take cover behind most objects and even slide around corners to get better positions. The shooting is satisfying. You get a nice arsenal of weapons from a shotgun, many pistols, machine guns including the MP40 and the Tommy gun. The guns feel great to fire. There's some nice impact and feedback to your hits. Enemies have a tendency to react to your shots, causing them to react like they are in pain. While playing on hard, you can really feel the deadly nature of the firefights. It does not take many shots to bring you down, and one wrong move can send you back to your last checkpoint. To add to the intensity are how some pieces of debris will fall on the ground from the gunfire, along with certain objects being destructible. The shooting feels more engaging and enjoyable compared to the first game. Though the shooting is solid here, there are some odd omissions from it as well. One odd thing was how enemies will use blind fire on you, but you cannot blind fire at all. The cover system works 95% of the time, but there are certain points where you'll get hit even though you are in indestructible cover. Some of the checkpoints can be pretty brutal, causing you to go back a decent amount, or even go back to the beginning of a shootout. In the first game, you need to make sure that any of your allies did not die or you failed the mission. With 2, your allies do not have any health bars, so you don't need to worry about them, which is much appreciated. But one thing I didn't like was how in some of the earlier missions, your allies would kill too many of the enemies, and this sucked some of the fun and excitement out of the shootouts. Like with the first game, the focus of the game is on the story. This means that the pacing is great for the narrative, but there's a lack of stuff to do within the city outside of the story. You can steal and sell cars for extra money, you can visit some different shops around the city to buy some different clothes to wear, or restock on weapons. But outside of this stuff and upgrading your cars, there really isn't anything extra to do. You can find vintage Playboys along with collecting wanted posters throughout the city, and while the Playboys have their own reward with finding them, the wanted posters are a complete waste of time. There is nothing gained from finding these things other than a trophy or achievement and wasting your time. Like with the first Mafia, I wish the sequel used the open world more because this was a fun space to be in and I wanted to spend more time in it. I think there could have been a great opportunity to have fun, optional side missions to complete and add value to the game. Like I said before, since the driving is so good, I think racing side missions would have been a great option. There could have been side missions where you needed to deliver items from the mob to different clients for money, and you could do this with a certain time restraint. Since there is a subplot dedicated to the Irish gangs, it would have been fun to attack optional hideouts of theirs, steal valuable items or cars of theirs, or even hurt their businesses in some way. I do like that there is some form of an economy with you earning money in this game, but I wish that there was more done with it. There isn't much for you to spend your money on, and it could have been interesting to make investments with your money to increase your profits, or even buy houses or buildings in the city. And to add to this, it would have been really great to decorate your hideouts to have them look the way you want them to look. At the same time, just like with the first game, this is more of a story-focused game that is set within a city that you can fully drive around. This is less of a typical open world and more of an area that you will be in and see different areas of it through the narrative. Cutting out the side mission fluff and choosing to focus on on just the story keeps the pacing on course to deliver the next engaging story beat. While it is annoying that you will change or lose hideouts in the game, or your money depending on the events in the story, these things are really just there to effectively put the player in the shoes of Vito and service the narrative. I do want to quickly make note of the DLC mission packs for the game. The first two revolve around Jimmy, and these missions mostly feel like cut side missions. There are a few standout missions, and all the missions run on an arcadey timer. This game was not built to have everything be on a timer. The missions can be decent distractions for the first two DLCs, but they can largely be skipped. The final DLC revolves around Joe and what he was doing while Vito was in prison. There's some story here and some good missions with some nice set pieces, but the bulk of the missions are similar to Jimmy's missions. While the DLC isn't great, it does do a decent enough job, and it's pretty fun to play. Like Mafia 1, Mafia 2 is less interested in the potential side mission fluff and chooses to put all their eggs in its basket of story, characters, driving, and gunfights. The driving and the shooting are the two standouts from the gameplay, but many areas of the gameplay also feel like the developers touched on an idea but didn't really develop it at all. This results in many aspects of the gameplay feeling rather simple and underdeveloped. And this brings us to the large amount of cut content from the game. Mafia 2 featured a lot of interesting mechanics and systems that were not present within the release game. There were more uses for your earned money in the cut content, with being able to buy houses, visit a car dealership, buy appliances, visiting a record store and buying records, along with being able to use the public transport system. There was a reputation system that would act like an experience system of sorts. You would increase your level from completing jobs and missions. As your respect grew, you would have lower prices in stores, and the fines and bribes from the police would be cheaper. Your reputation level could also decrease from killing innocents and police officers. The player would need to make sure that they had a gun license if the police asked for it. The melee system had a lot of cut content. All the melee weapons were cut from the game, like knives and bats. The cut melee mechanics appear to make this aspect of the game feel much more interesting than what was provided in the release game. A large amount of missions were also removed from the game. This included more missions within the World War II sections of the game. Like I said before, this is a section that really jumps out to you as being cut from the game. Some of the cut content can actually be seen in the DLC missions. There's even evidence of 3 cut endings from Mafia 2. During the development, the game was going to feature different endings to the player, but they decided to cut 3 of them and just go with one. The rumor is that one ending featured seeing Joe die, or another one, Joe and Vito having a duel at a cut hotel location from the game, and another one saw Vito saving Joe. While these ideas are interesting, I do think that the developer should have put the option for these endings within the game. Giving the choice to the player fits the gaming medium more than a film, and having an impactful choice could strengthen the ending to the game. A good amount of cut content actually addresses some of the issues that I brought up from assessing the game. The cut melee mechanics would have made for a more engaging system with more variety. The additional World War II missions would have extended that part of the story, but it could have helped to establish Vito more early on, along with letting it really hit home that he had to serve his time. Plus, when Joe talks to his contacts to get Vito out of the army, that moment would have landed with more impact because a nice chunk of the game was set during the war. The cut content really does paint a sad picture of what could have been with this game if the game's true vision could have been realized. Based on what we received with the release game, Mafia 2 provided a memorable, narratively focused experience with great writing and a compelling story. Mafia 2 is a game that I love, but with all the information related to the cut content, it makes you wonder if we will ever see a true director's cut for this version of the game that incorporates most of that content. Mafia 2 is an underrated game and a memorable sequel. The story focuses on the rise within the Italian mob and the cost of that life. We get to experience the life of Vito and his want to achieve respect, power, and wealth. He never wanted to end up like his father, but in the end he ends up in a similar position as him, even with all his efforts to not end up like that. Vito and Joe's relationship is one of the large reasons that this story works so well. They look out for each other, but they're also their own worst enemies. I still find myself undecided on the ending of the game, but I do think that it ends on a darker note, with Vito needing to live with the actions that he made and what it cost him. The gameplay provides a lot of fun experiences, while also feeling like it could have been better in some areas. The fist fighting is better than the first game, but it's too simplistic that these encounters are rather boring to complete. The shooting is improved from the first game with a good use of a traditional cover system. The driving is arguably the best in the series. The amount of cut content content can leave a sour taste in your mouth for Mafia 2 because in a way I feel cheated out of a potentially even better game than what we got. Much of this cut content seems to stem from the developers not being able to finish these aspects of the game before the launch from the troubled development. As it stands, Mafia 2 is a memorable experience with a large focus on its narrative and an example of great writing in a video game. The escalation in the violence is thrilling and the shootouts are exciting. And while there was a large amount of cut content from the game, I hope that one day that we can see a true director's cut version of the game brought to life. Either way, Mafia 2 is a sequel worth experiencing.